Welcome to the Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions about Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week, it's part 3 of our spotlight on actor Deborah Kerr. We'll be discussing Tea and Sympathy and Beloved Infidel. And in fact, we'll begin discussing them right now. We open with Leonard Maltin's views on Tea and Sympathy from the TV Movies and Video Guide 1991 edition. He gives the film 3 stars out of a possible 4. Glossy, but well-acted version of Robert Anderson play about prep school boys' affair with a teacher's wife, skirting homosexual issues.
Skirting! Relevant.
Both Kerrs, or Kerrs, give sensitive portrayals, scripted by the playwright. All 3 stars, including Erickson, recreate their Broadway roles. The director, Vincent Minnelli. Cast list, Deborah Kerr, John Kerr, Leif Erikson, Edward Andrews, Daryl Hickman, Dean Jones, Norma Crane.
I ask again, if he wanted to be called Vincent, why the extra E? Well, that kind of summarizes received opinion on the movie, or at least on its relationship to the play.
Glossy but well acted, skirting homosexual issues.
Yes, I would say so.
You've actually read the play, is that correct?
Oh my God, when I was 13 or 14.
But you have some sense of how it was changed or modified for the screen?
Not from that reading of it.
No, but you've been doing some research.
Sure, yeah.
All right, let's start with that.
Well, the term sister boy, no one's ever called anybody that.
Right. I guess it's a harder edge slur in the play?
Well, no, just sissy boy.
Oh, okay.
Which is a pretty dumb change.
Is that the biggest change that occurred?
No, the biggest change is that the bullying of Tom in the play was initially prompted by him skinny dipping with a teacher who was thought by the boys to be another slur.
The movie does attack all of these issues obliquely. We definitely understand that these teachers are also under pressure to perform as masculine, and there's always a danger that all of a sudden you will lose your masculinity card.
Other big change, as I'm sure you could have guessed, Deborah Kerr's final line in the movie was a big curtain line on the stage, and there was no coda sort of saying that the adulterous woman was punished and then also sort of taking it back in the same breath. But anyway, there was no moralizing coda. What you were saying there points to something I find interesting about the discourse on Tea and Sympathy, insofar as it exists. It's not that much of a talked about movie, but it was an autobiographical story by the playwright, who also wrote the screenplay, Robert Anderson, and he didn't think it was about homosexuality, because the boy isn't homosexual. So, because it, I guess, was the first American play to openly discuss the existence of homosexuality, it kind of got brought into these discussions about queerness in media and popular culture, although that was never the intention of the play.
Right, and it fares badly if you look at it through that lens. However, I would say its time has really come. The issue of gender and masculine or feminine performance have come so much to the forefront, and this movie has a lot to say about that.
Right, and it's very ahead of its time in that respect as well. Minnelli is a good director for that, because although in his private life he was homosexual or bisexual, depending who you ask, since nobody is inside his head, as a film director he was very interested in these issues. This movie seems to call back in more than one way, and to be maybe another approach to something that he was doing in Meet Me in St. Louis, which isn't remembered, although I wrote about it this way and it got published. It's remembered as a cozy family Christmas drama, or if you want to dig a little bit deeper, a cozy family Christmas drama with a dark side. What it's not remembered as is a coming-of-age story about learning how to perform gender. But that is its most interesting aspect to me.
Sure, this is definitely something that Minnelli would return to often. We have discussed previously on the podcast Home from the Hill, which is almost solely focused on what the society it depicts thinks a man is.
And the weird ritualistic bonfire in this movie does occur in the play, but of course, because it's a play, it was just mentioned, and so it becomes an opportunity.
They didn't set the stage on fire.
No, although that would have been interesting. It becomes an opportunity for Minnelli to call back to another weird, ritualistic, pagan-esque bonfire in Meet Me in St. Louis.
This movie, I think it does an incredible job of analyzing the horrors of all male environments.
Yeah, I was interested in your take, Dave, as a sensitive young man growing up, what you would have made of this story.
Well, I saw it when I was a teenager and I liked it a lot. I definitely was looking at it, I remember, through, I think, the lens that would have been coming into view socially in the 80s and 90s and thinking, well, it seems like kind of chickening out to make him not gay.
But yeah, there was never any, it's an autobiographical story, so there was never any question of this protagonist being gay. It's just telling a different story.
And I think it's important to take it on its own terms. I never attended a school like this, all-male prep school, where there's just no escape from troubled masculinity everywhere you turn.
And you were athletic?
I definitely remember thinking about this movie at the time. I won medals at track meets and I could throw 90 miles an hour, and I definitely still was not thought of as like a cool guy. Because, yeah, there were other aspects to me, like loving old movies.
Did you walk funny?
Yeah, probably, and talking about being a vegetarian all the time. These things didn't go down well with the boys at St. Thomas High School.
You know, in that scene in the movie that starts these rumors about him, or brings them to a crisis, when he goes and sits down with the faculty wives, I was thinking, oh yeah, that would be what Dave would want to do, rather than throwing the pigskin around with all the boys on the beach.
Not exactly sure about that. If I was given a choice between sewing and throwing a football, I would definitely much prefer to throw a football.
No, I don't mean sewing. I don't like sewing either.
Right, exactly.
Just sitting with
Deborah Kerr, but the other two seem like they really suck.
But he wanted to sit with
Yeah.
Deborah Kerr.
Yeah, you have to take the other two as part of the bargain.
Sitting with some girls and talking is what I was thinking.
Well, yeah, definitely. I would have loved to do that. Talking to Deborah Kerr is far preferable to throwing a football.
Well, I mean, another scandalous aspect of the play is that this 17-year-old boy, apparently his age was bumped up by a year, well, by a day in the movie version, is sleeping with this, or has his first sexual experience with this considerably older woman. In terms of the actor's actual ages, Deborah Kerr is only 10 years older than John Kerr.
Definitely something contemporary discourse would frown upon.
Brown doesn't begin to describe it. And I mean, this wasn't ever really considered, as you can tell from the way the movie presents it, it's not something that was ever really considered cool and normal
No.
to be seducing 17-year-olds. Well, I mean, is seducing the word? I don't know. The movie and play have a hilarious structure that's more like an erotic fantasy than anything, where Deborah Kerr is just getting more and more, like, she knows this is a terrible decision to cheat on her husband and to offer herself to a 17-year-old or barely 18-year-old. She's just getting more and more and more backed into the corner until she has to do it kind of like a Christ-like self-sacrifice. Because there's just nothing else she can do to save this boy.
Right, but I think the movie makes it pretty clear that she is attracted to him.
Well, yes, but I mean, she just knows that this is not a good idea.
Of course it's not a good idea.
And the movie has to create these stakes where she feels like there is absolutely no choice but to do this. But when you think of the thing that there's absolutely no choice but to do, which is offer herself sexually to him to save him, it's kind of hilarious.
It is, but it makes you believe it. His freak out after the failed encounter with Ellie Martin, it convinces you that this is a man that must have a successful encounter with a woman or else he's gonna die.
And all of this is because of gender and sexuality getting confused. One of the things that watching this movie made me think about, as someone who embarked on quite the identity search in terms of both sexuality and gender at puberty and shortly thereafter, how can you become confused about your sexuality? This is my question. How can you doubt your sexuality? Wouldn't the fact that you are attracted to women be enough? And these are the interesting issues of sex and gender, kind of stuff I love, sexual and gender psychology that this movie explores. Because it turns out that just knowing that you are attracted to women isn't enough to convince you, because you don't really know what homosexuality is if you're not homosexual or bisexual. So you start to think that simply the failure to be heterosexual or perform heterosexuality in the right way must be homosexuality, not attraction to or romantic love for people of the same sex.
On the terms of this movie, it's very clear that being attracted to or having any interest in women is like the last thing on the list in being manly, because all of the men who at least pretend to be secure in their masculinity want nothing to do with women at all. The film uses homosexuality as a stalking horse, and very important for everyone to remember that in 1956, in most states in the United States, it was illegal, to have homosexual sex. However, that's not at all what anyone is really concerned about in this movie. It's just, are you in the man club or not?
I guess that's true, yeah. But anyway, as a footnote to the conversation, in my case, I thought I was homosexual because I wasn't interested in boys, but I wasn't interested in boys because I was suppressing that interest, and eventually got onto parallel tracks. Parallel mental tracks of being interested in boys unconsciously, but having formed an identity around not being interested in boys. Anyway, it sorted itself out within a few years. There's a little bit of bisexuality in there somewhere too. There is for most people. But yeah, okay, so attacking this movie from the perspective of gender.
Definitions of, at that time, settled categories of gender.
So Deborah Kerr's crisis in the movie, as you were talking about, is that her husband isn't willing to admit that he has anything in common with her, such as feelings. If he were to have feelings and be interested in spending time with her and talking to her, then that would be unmanly, right? And so this is the wedge that opens up in their marriage. And he has a particular investment in this masculinity performance because his whole life is dedicated to teaching boys how to do it, basically.
Well, not only that, it comes up on numerous occasions that left to his own devices in a social vacuum, he is very much like Tom. He did used to sit by himself and listen to records when he was a teenager. And when we meet him at the end, that's exactly what he's doing, sitting in the dark listening to records like a morose little boy. That's Deborah Kerr's type. So it kind of becomes clear by the end again, because she refers to it. When we had our honeymoon, you let me in, you seem to have feelings, and then you shut everything down. But we never see him actually act that way until this final scene. And we're like, okay, yeah, he really is a goth.
But if men and women can't admit to having anything in common, then marriage has to be about really nothing except a social bond and producing children.
Which they haven't done.
which they haven't done. Then the men and the women, have to get their social and emotional needs. Well, the women can get their social and emotional needs fulfilled outside of the marriage with other women, but the men don't have any emotional needs.
Right, but...
They have plenty of social needs, though.
In this film, Deborah Kerr's not getting much out of these women either.
No.
That she has to hang out with.
Well, that's part of what ultimately pushes her toward this great sacrifice.
We talked last time about MGM and my impression that she was brought on in the mid-1940s as, the next Greer Garson. And this is the closest Deborah Kerr comes in an MGM movie to playing something like a Greer Garson part, although very different. Think of Goodbye, Mr. Chips, where she has such an important role in helping to bridge the gap in communication between the inarticulate, clueless Mr. Chips and the boys in his care.
But could you imagine Greer Garson sexually offering herself this way? It is a scandalous play in its polite bourgeois way even now.
Not exactly the same thing, but think of Random Harvest and Greer Garson with Smithy there. I mean, he's not a boy, but he is a man with only like half his mind.
God.
And she's totally in love with him and pulls him out of his doom spiral.
Yeah, but she doesn't deflower him.
Well, from his perspective, she does. Had you seen this film before?
When I was in junior high, in my little school library, there were volumes of Best American Plays of every year, hardcover volumes. And I read my way through several of those volumes. Immediately afterwards, I read some dramatic criticism and got some taste. And this play was considered very middlebrow.
Sure. So you washed your hands of it, and if you ever saw it listed in the TV guide...
Avoid. As I said, it actually does have a lot of interesting and subtle things, as well as humorous and not subtle things to say about the relationship between gender and sexuality. In the case of a heterosexual boy who's not performing masculinity correctly. He's really outside of it. Like, he's not really making any kind of attempt to begin with, because it has never occurred to him to doubt either his masculinity or, he doesn't have a trans identity. So it's never occurred to him to doubt his masculinity or his heterosexuality until everybody starts piling on him this way.
Now, the film brings in some background. His father is a completely clueless idiot who was not there. So there was no male role model. Not that this kind of male role model is at all useful to anyone, but presumably a lot of these other boys did have a guy like Tom's dad telling them from the beginning what they had to do and what they shouldn't do.
Deborah Kerr is just mortified right from the very beginning, because she had this weird Blanche Dubois type backstory with this boy husband of hers who died in the war. He too doubted his masculinity, and she can see Tom's potential for developing this kind of neurosis.
He's definitely got this neurosis. He runs around with a knife. He's in a bad way.
Sure, but she could see the potential for that happening
right away.
Yeah, just as soon as he sat down and started sewing that button on and the other faculty wives started making fun of him.
She's already got her eye on him, sitting up in his room by himself, playing the guitar. He's not fitting in.
In her view, and in the view of the author of this play, who I guess lived it, what I wonder is, can we separate these rumors going around about Tom being unmanly from the subtext of him possibly being homosexual? Like that, you're saying you think that we can separate those two, and that the one is as bad as or worse than the other in the eyes of this society.
I don't think you can separate them, but what I am saying is that the masculine codes that this film examines, the thing that you don't ever want to be accused of is being a sister boy like Tom, which comes with a connotation of homosexuality, which is very much outside the bounds of the society that we're looking at here. But it's all abstract. The idea of anyone having sex with anyone is kind of outside of the frame of reference for these guys.
Although some of them are maybe having sex with Ellie, or maybe they're all just lying about that.
Yeah, it seems like all of them are lying, right?
Well, I don't know. Ellie says they come to her.
The important thing is that people think you might go to her.
Right. If this society were some kind of Lacanian system, that would be her function in the system. Actual sex is not important, just the possibility.
Yeah, because we never meet one guy in this movie, other than Tom, who's madly in love with Deborah Kerr. None of these other guys shows any interest in any woman at all. In theory, they are interested in women.
They're performing harassment of Ellie.
Oh, yeah, sure. But that's not interest. I mean, that's the absolute reverse of interest, right? They're absolutely just using her as a prop. No wonder she's so bitter and horrible.
Yeah, in this sort of Archie Comics soda fountain that doubles as a Lynch diner.
It makes you long for the wholesomeness of Lynch. It's so awful.
But yeah, because what would it mean to accuse somebody of, unless you're an evangelical Christian, simply accusing somebody, my God, you're a man who has sex with other men. Who cares? Nobody cares.
It never quite gets to that point.
No, but what I'm saying is, unless there has to be the implication of unmanliness tied to that, because in and of itself, nobody other than a psychotic evangelical Christian cares.
Right. The important thing is, are you coming across as a man? Doing all the different things that we're told that you must do. And one of them on the list is that you should shun women and, if necessary, tell everyone about the women that you have slept with at some point.
I do feel, though, like Minnelli doesn't go down the easy road that a lot of movies would go down now, making it seem like these men have a sexual interest in each other beyond the homosocial.
That's more like the American Beauty kind of approach, right? The evil homophobic neighbor who's eventually going to kill Kevin Spacey is actually wants to kiss him.
Well, yeah, no, I don't even mean like they're all closeted homosexuals. I just mean a lot of movies now would want to make the joke that there's some kind of broad, diffuse sexual interest between men with this kind of performance of masculinity. But I don't feel like the movie actually goes there. But it does show us things that they're doing to each other that are sexually really weird. I guess the best way to make the case that I'm groping toward here is this bonfire ritual. There's this ritual act of homosexuality, of rape, of the younger boys by the older boys. But it is just a ritual. It's like any possibility of which within the spectrum of human sexuality, especially in an all-boys school or all-girls school, there's a very high possibility of this. Any possibility of sexual interest between these boys has been crystallized in this ritual, tearing their pajamas off. It's all been drained into that, so there can't be any actual sexual feeling left. And so the way to express that there is a real homosexual danger is to precisely not do that. And the way that you can tell that it has been contained is that by performing these rituals, the younger boys are brought into the circle of masculinity. But Tom, as a real threat, has to be excluded from it by being excluded from this homoerotic ritual.
Yeah, they form a ring around him, and they're not going to let him fight back, right? Because that's what he's been told by his dad.
But they're also not going to make the rape performance on him.
No, because they hit upon the fiendish idea that it's even more demeaning if you say he's out of bounds. It wouldn't be chivalrous to attack Sister Boy.
I know literally nothing about Lacan, but I feel like a Lacanian analysis of this text would be very fruitful.
Presumably this also happens in the play. Al, his only real friend, other than Deborah Kerr, decides that he's got to short-circuit this and dives into the melee and rips Sister Boy's clothes off, and it's actually the best that anyone could have done in the circumstances.
Right, and of course he's an interesting character because in this string of signifiers, he has managed so far, Al, to be included in the masculine in-group while retaining his sympathy for the outsider, while retaining his humanity. But because these signifiers are so slippery, if too much pressure is exerted on this contradiction, he can find himself slipping into the wrong category.
Yeah, it's like Augustine on time, right? I know what it is until someone asks me about it, and then I don't know what it is. It's the same thing with a masculine walk.
Right, I mean, that's a pretty amazing sequence between those two boys, right? Which is also kind of gently comic in the middle of all of this melodramatic craziness.
A moment of levity, but nevertheless has a lot of interesting things to say about masculine performance.
Well, everybody is completely certain that Tom walks in a funny way. You know, I guess the way Anthony Perkins walks in Psycho. The movie already sets us up for that trope by focusing, long before this scene, on his walk. And I was like, oh, well, the camera's on him as he's walking. You can see the back of him. So we're supposed to think he has a funny walk. And then, of course, I'm asking myself, does he have a funny walk? He's not walking like Anthony Perkins in Psycho. But, you know, this walk is in the eye of the beholder, as we find out.
Did you recognize Al?
Yeah, he's been resurrected after his fate in Leave Her to Heaven.
Right, he also is Lionel in The Human Comedy. Wonderful actor, Daryl Hickman. I think he does a really nice job, and this is a tough character, right? Because he is one of the guys, but he's Tom's roommate and he likes him and he does what he can to stand up for him, but he's not Christ-like either, and he does give in to pressure from his family to move to another house next year.
I mean, that's all thoroughly discussed in his scene with Deborah Kerr, where he's like, you're a woman, you're an outsider to all of this, you don't have any stakes.
Yeah, people keep telling her, you are just here to offer a little tea and sympathy, and she wants to do more, much more.
And boy does she. But I mean, what is ultimately at stake here is the question, because once they're out of this setting, I guess this is a prep school, right? Yeah. And whatever reputation they establish here is they're going to carry with them into college?
Well, I think it is really important that this narrative is told retrospectively. It's the 10-year reunion, so John Kerr, Tom, is coming back, roaming the grounds where he almost killed himself 10 years earlier, reminiscing about the brush with death that he had. Some of the other boys that remember him from that time are like, why would he come back here? But nobody confronts him, and he goes to see the coach, finds out about what happened to Deborah Kerr's character, and then it ends. He's obviously managed to secure a place for himself in the world. Minnelli is the master of intense emotion, and he convinces me that this was a crisis point. If Deborah Kerr had not acted, he would not have survived. Although in her letter, she does claim that she now thinks that he probably would have been all right and she didn't need to do any of this. But as you say, this was a coda added for the film.
But what does Elle think are going to be the stakes involved here if people start thinking he is unmanly?
Oh, well, it's going to affect the fraternity you get into at college, and that will affect the rest of your life for sure, because you won't have the business connections that you need.
Right. The point is that this is an elite.
Well, sure, you don't go to this kind of prep school unless you're being groomed to be a master of the universe.
Right, and that's why every step you take is very important, and there's a lot of pressure surrounding all of it.
Some of these guys probably want to run for office someday. You don't want it coming out that you were known as Sister Boy in prep school. That's not going to be good for your campaign.
And Al tells him there is only one way to kill these rumors. You have to sleep with somebody who's going to
make sure that everyone knows it.
Yeah, tell everybody.
Tom's not thinking clearly, because otherwise he would definitely think twice about this plan. The movie puts you right there with him. You can see why he's making this horrible phone call to Ellie.
Well, men do have this problem that women don't, which is if you really desperately need to sleep with somebody, that could be a lot of performance pressure. And desperately want to sleep with somebody you actually don't want to sleep with.
It can't be very fun, no.
In Tom's mind at this point, if I were really masculine, none of that would matter. The mere fact of having a willing vagina would have overcome all of my emotions and anxiety, and I just would have been, ramrod straight and ready to go.
He has all of these ideas, these bad ideas in his head.
And homosexuality for him, as I, started by saying, which I find fascinating, homosexuality for him is not an attraction to men, is not a love for men. It's a failure of some awful ideal of heterosexuality.
Yeah, it's the absence of masculinity, which is something that you see throughout Hollywood history, the early years, right? Gay characters or characters that are coded as gay, like Edward Everett Horton's characters, he doesn't ever show himself to be attracted to men. He's just not manly. And this is supposed to mean something. It did mean something to audiences at that time. And so that's really what we're looking at here. It's the absence of something rather than the presence of something positive and dynamic, which actual sexuality is. The figure of the gay man in popular culture in the mid-20th century is just the nullification of masculinity. That's it.
Well, like I said, and it wasn't that different for me, although I was much younger than Tom during my period of identity searching, but having suppressed any interest in boys as too dangerous, emotionally, psychologically, I then took that absence of interest in the opposite sex to mean, I must therefore be homosexual. I wasn't upset about it. I was thrilled.
Well, it was a different time.
Well, it was a different time, that absolutely. But also just, the fact that then I didn't have to deal with boys. That was amazing. But then I met boys like you.
Much later, yes. Well, I'm happy that it worked out this way for us.
We talked a lot about Tom's dilemma and not very much about Deborah Kerr. So what made you choose this movie?
Since I only had 6 slots, I wanted to get a few different slices of Deborah Kerr's career. So I took 2 from the early British period, 2 from the kind of middle From Here to Eternity MGM period, and then 2 melodramas from the late 50s. And this one definitely leapt to mind as an interesting choice for her. And I knew that she had played the role on Broadway as well, so she's indelibly associated with this performance. It's pretty incredible. It's so restrained, and mostly it uses her talent for portraying observation.
It's restrained, but there's a restrained hysteria to
Of course. In some ways, although she's a much more sympathetic observer, but she's watching Tom at certain points the way her character Sister Clodagh is watching Sister Ruth in Black Narcissus.
Well, she's a lot more sympathetic to him.
That's right. But again, so much of the greatness of Deborah Kerr comes from her ability to dominate a scene that she's often not even speaking, just watching someone else do something, and you're right there with her. Of course, the script helps her by allowing her to talk about this backstory with her first husband who got himself killed on the battlefield just to prove that he was a man. We've also heard her talk to her husband about how she fell for him because he sat by himself listening to records.
The scene between Laura and Tom, which, geez, by the way, this really does feel like a play that's haunted by Tennessee Williams. Laura and Tom are from Glass Menagerie. Yeah. And then there's also the Deborah Kerr backstory feels like it's haunted by Blanche Blanche Dubois' backstory about her husband, who she finds out is gay, and she, spoilers, tells him that she's disgusted because she's shocked and he commits suicide. Her guilt contributes toward her nervous breakdown. And the fact that this story is so Tennessee Williams haunted, I want to say maybe brings the actual homosexuality back into it somehow. But of course, he was also the dominant mid-century American playwright.
Yeah, I don't think any playwright was writing anything without some reference to Tennessee Williams in the mid-1950s.
Any sensitive playwright, male playwright. But I thought that scene where John Kerr kisses her, and their whole discussion, and they're sort of dancing around the issue of his feelings about her, and her trying to decide what to do about that, right? That whole long scene that takes place in real time, that they must have played a version of often on the stage already. It felt very real, like two people negotiating a dangerous attraction, how it really feels in real life. It took me back to those kinds of situations. How about you?
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And they both know that there's this ticking bomb off screen of the Ellie Martin assignation that he's set up, because she overheard the phone call and he knows that's where he's supposed to be at 9 o'clock.
Right, and so what do you think? She acts like she's trying to save him from a fate worse than death. To apply the melodramatic term that, is used in Victorian narratives for virgins being raped. But do you think any of that is jealousy?
Possibly, but because she takes the trouble to visit Ellie Martin beforehand and get a real sense of what this woman is like, I think it gives you enough to go on to, if you want to, mainly credit her actions to the idea that she has a pretty clear sense of what's going to happen. This woman's not going to make Tom comfortable. They're not going to ease into a pleasant sexual encounter. She's going to bring out all of his insecurities and he's going to flip out.
Deborah Kerr is disgusted by Ellie.
Yeah.
And Ellie is someone whose finer feelings have been cauterized by life. But there's this one interesting moment of humanity between them, right? Where Deborah Kerr gives her one of the flowers from the bunch that Tom has sent her.
Right. Well, of course, if you want to have some kind of Machiavellian reading, you could think she does this in order to signal to Tom that she knows the stupid thing that he is trying to do when he gets to Ellie's apartment.
Oh, is that how you read it?
No, I'm not sure, but you could read it that way, right?
But Ellie also mentions it off the top of her scene with Tom, right? It does seem like there's a faint beckoning to a better world for her in this one flower that
Right.
she actually takes home with her.
Yeah.
In a better world, this poor woman would be receiving some flowers before she's sexually used by a man.
The film does a decent job of allowing you to imagine how she came to this pass without letting her off the hook for being so nasty with Tom. And because you've been following him throughout the film, when she just starts cackling sister boy, it's like...
Well, yeah, I mean, she is desensitized, like I said. She is portrayed in melodrama terms as a hard-bitten, nasty character, but you also know that this is because...
Well, she's being mercilessly taunted by these same boys every day at the cafe.
Well, because she doesn't want to be sleeping with these boys. She's not doing this out of any sexual interest.
No, she's doing it for a new radio.
Exactly, right? So if she discovers that, Tom isn't interested in her either, she's ready to be set off.
Yeah. And she could have gone the other way and just said, well, just get me a new radio and we'll tell everyone we had sex. But no, she can't do that.
Well, no, because she belongs to this same system that pretty much everybody does. The only exceptions are Deborah Kerr and Al has joined the bunch.
Very sad. Beautiful Technicolor in this film. I don't want to turn to our next one without mentioning that.
Was there any more you had to say about Tea and Sympathy?
How did you feel about Leif Erikson's performance? As Malton mentioned, he was also in the play and carried over to the film.
I actually kind of felt like, but maybe this is a directorial choice, that he wasn't on the same level as Kerr, and that there was more interesting stuff to explore in that marriage if he had been. His performance is good, but I just didn't think there was as much complexity.
I think a lot of people could have done most of his scenes for sure, but I do like him a lot in the final moments that we spend with him. him as he sulks in the dark. All right, Leonard Maltin on Beloved Infidel from 1959 gives it 2 stars out of a possible 4. Ill-conceived casting of Peck as F. Scott Fitzgerald makes romance with Hollywood columnist Sheilah Graham in late 1930s more ludicrous than real. Lush photography is the only virtue of a blunt look at the cinema capital. Directed by Henry King. Cast list: Gregory Peck, Deborah Kerr, Eddie Albert, Philip Ober, Herbert Ridley, John Sutton, Karen Booth, and Ken Scott.
Well, you picked this and you'd seen it before, so I guess you don't concur?
Oh, I love this movie. Now, it's true Gregory Peck does not suggest F. Scott Fitzgerald in any way, either physically or persona-wise, but I don't really care. I love Fitzgerald's novels, but I don't need him to be portrayed faithfully in a film, and I think what Gregory Peck does in this movie is really interesting. Deborah Kerr as Sheilah Graham is just burned into my brain. That scene where she freaks out on the beach, it's one of the first things I think of when I think of Deborah Kerr, always.
Yeah, it was good. It moved me to tears. So according to Henry King, who wasn't crazy about this movie, which did not do well, Gregory Peck was the driving force behind it, thought he was going to give an Oscar-winning performance, but according to King's diagnosis as to why that didn't happen is that the screenplay's portrayal and Peck's portrayal of Fitzgerald was too realistic, and it was repugnant.
It is repugnant.
Like, too repugnant, too dark. That is not where Henry King wanted to go, but they went there.
No, I'm glad they did. I think it's incredible. But physically, he doesn't look like F. Scott Fitzgerald in any way, who was like a slight blonde man, wasn't he? I mean, he doesn't look like Gregory Peck. But yeah, I mean, really, who cares?
He was also quite pudgy by this time, having been an alcoholic. No one who's been an alcoholic for decades is going to look like Gregory Peck by the time they're in their 40s.
True. Yeah, I mean, Peck gets really nasty in this movie. He's almost at the level of Lute in Duel in the Sun at certain points. But it's embedded in a far more complex performance.
Not as nasty as the character could have gotten, because Sheilah Graham didn't write during her life about the fact that she was Jewish, and super drunk F. Scott Fitzgerald would taunt her about that. Obviously, this screenplay, in dramatic shorthand, it makes it seem like there were only 2 benders and 2 nasty confrontations. In reality, of course, there were many. The John Lennon-esque story of him getting sober for the last year of his life, though, true. Sheilah Graham's story is in itself totally fascinating. I feel like someone should take and she wrote many, many memoirs.
I've always been interested in reading one, but I haven't yet.
Someone should take another crack at this material, because bookending her beginnings with his ending, you've got some kind of crazy story about America right there. I didn't know that F. Scott Fitzgerald, I read Tender is the Night for the podcast. I've read The Great Gatsby, obviously, but he's never been one of my favorite writers, so I had no idea that he died in total obscurity. Well, not total obscurity, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but he was no longer popular with the public or with critics at the time of his death. It seems inconceivable now. And it was Edmund Wilson that managed to start the revival right after he died, which makes you think that, you know, this trope that you see, that we've seen in movies before, like that Modigliani movie by Becker, this trope, this idea that the artist has to die before it's possible for their work to be revived, is actually true.
Well, it's not necessarily true. There are certainly some of his contemporaries that maintain their reputations throughout their lives and beyond.
No, but I'm talking about, someone who doesn't have the reputation anymore or never developed it. Somebody just in American literature, like Melville.
Yeah, I was going to say, Melville, Thoreau, Fitzgerald, they were all, around 1940, no one ever talked about any of these people.
And now they're ubiquitous.
By the time you get to 1960, these are all very celebrated milestones in the American literary story.
But how horrible.
Well, we are going to be doing, in 2027, a podcast on 2 Fitzgerald movies of the 1970s, and we're reading 2 of the books, Great Gatsby and Love of the Last Tycoon. We'll have a lot of opportunity to go into Fitzgerald as a novelist and as a subject for adaptation at that point.
But obviously, this movie itself, although not successful, was part of the Fitzgerald craze. Henry King also made Tender as the Night, also a failure. That one he attributed to the fact that the studio wouldn't let him cut it. There was a new studio boss and just didn't let him cut it. We're just like, no, whatever, it's fine. We'll send it out.
He directed Sun Also Rises as well, right? The Hemingway adaptation. Yeah. He was Fox's literary specialist.
I don't feel like this is one of his, well, you obviously disagree. I don't feel like this is one of his best movies, but...
That would really be saying something, because he made some of the greatest movies of the 20th century. I do love this movie, though. I think it's really good. It's not as good as State Fair.
Song of Bernadette, Love is a Many Splendid Thing. I guess those are my top 3 of the ones I've seen.
Definitely a director that deserves more attention. So he was conflicted about this film.
Just having read his comments, because there's a book out there where he comments on every one of his movies, which are a lot of movies. And having read a few of his comments, I feel like Henry King is a director who didn't like to get into ugly or controversial material. So, not really, kind of ironic that he gets saddled with taking on the modernists for Fox. Oh, and by the way, speaking of this being a Fox movie, the movie that kills F. Scott Fitzgerald, Henry King had to pull one out of the Fox archives. In reality, it was a movie by a different studio. This Thing Called Love, which is a Columbia movie with Rosalind Russell and Melvin Douglas, but doesn't seem any more highbrow than the Don Amici and Carmen Miranda movie that kills him in Beloved Infidel.
Well, that's Don Amici, Carmen Miranda, and Alice Faye.
Right. I guess it's amusing that Fox is getting meta about its own lowbrow productions.
Well, I don't know what they were doing with that early scene where Sheilah Graham is going after the star of a movie about Chicago burning, right? Because that would be Alice Faye. That character that she's insulting, I guess you're supposed to think is Alice Faye, although she doesn't come across like Alice Faye to me. And Henry King directed in Old Chicago.
Did Henry King think Alice Faye couldn't act, or who knows?
Alice Faye is wonderful. Although it's true, In Old Chicago is one of my least favorite Henry King movies, as we mentioned when we did it. Not her fault. Maybe everyone was too down from a visit from Sheilah Graham on the set.
So I think we need to dig into this movie. We've danced around it quite a bit.
Yeah, so the protagonist is Sheilah Graham. She's the one that we start with. We don't meet F. Scott Fitzgerald for quite a long time. We meet her as she sets sail from England for New York, and she claims that she's just taking a little break before she goes back and marries into the aristocracy.
And I really like the way Deborah Kerr plays this, because I feel like the obvious acting choice here is to lampshade that there's something off about this woman's story.
She just seems very comfortable in the role she's created for herself.
But at the same time, it's so ludicrous, right, that you find yourself doubting her. This, you feel that there is something off, but Kerr is not hanging a sign on it.
Does it really make sense that she would come to New York and try to crash the publishing business just as a lark before getting married? Maybe, but we find out absolutely not. She has no intention of ever going back to England. She's got her eye on the main chance as a journalist in America, a journalist of a very particular kind, the kind that sells newspapers. And how do you sell newspapers? By starting conversations and in some cases starting fights. That's in the tradition of Walter Winchell, who was a really big deal at this time. A lot of the Hollywood columnists as well, right? And she will become one of them. Hedda and Luella. So she just goes right after people. It's like Gawker.
Yeah, I mean, the title of her articles sound like clickbait articles.
She makes no bones about it. That's her business. Get people to grab that paper.
So it's a relatively rare portrait, I guess, because it is autobiographical, of just an entirely competent professional woman whose focus is on building her career and economic independence.
In the midst of doing all of this, and she gets this big opportunity to go to Hollywood and crash the Hedda Luella business, and she does brilliantly at that as well, although in some cases she may be pushing a little too hard, at least from the perspective of the studio heads, but I don't know if she ever moderated her tone. That's kind of left up in the air. At a party she meets F. Scott Fitzgerald, who is at that point still employed as a Hollywood screenwriter, but not doing so well. That doesn't come out right away.
Obviously, there's a kind of Star is Born quality to the movie.
But I like the way it plays with that because, okay, he acquaints her with higher literature. It doesn't really do anything for her career. Her career, she knew what she was doing, and she was on track no matter what.
It does a lot for her personally, though. Like,
That's right.
She really emphasized this in her writings about him. She had an education. She went to school. She went to high school, but did not go to college.
No.
And she felt that her education was inadequate.
She wrote a book called College of One.
Fitzgerald designed for her, The College of One.
Of course, this is a tremendously enriching encounter with a very interesting mind that she fell in love with. The only way he intersects with her career is negatively. I mean, that incredible, nerve-wracking sequence where they go to Chicago and he's completely hammered and interrupting her as she tries to win her way back onto the radio waves.
Well, this is something that I've just never seen before at all in a movie, which is a woman's career being jeopardized by a man's embarrassing behavior.
Yeah, well, I guess you could say it's harkening back a little bit to Norman Maine interrupting Janet Gaynor's speech at the end of Star is Born, hitting her in the face by mistake. I mean, it feels like Gregory Peck is repeatedly hitting her in the face, even though he's halfway across the auditorium.
But this is someone specifically fucking up your job. Now, I do think this is probably a melodrama trope that has appeared in women's fiction beyond this, but you don't see it that often. You don't see that often in a movie in any case.
No, I think it's really brilliantly rendered on the screen here by all of the performers and by Henry King. That, too, is a scene that I will never forget.
Because you just never see a woman weighing, can I afford to have this relationship in my life, or is it going to ruin my career? And she's not even a career risk. At least as she's presented in the movie, she just needs to keep earning a living, a nice living.
Yeah, she's not monomaniacal about it, but she's also pretty determined.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole point of her doing this radio broadcast is because she wants to compete with the other Hollywood gossip columnists. She wants to be on their level, on a Luella Parsons level.
And the performance she gives in the initial airing of her radio program is hilarious, right? But also deeply painful to listen to.
But is it really the 30-second wait that freaks her out? There's a broadcast about Hitler right before her stupid gossip column.
Yeah, who knows, right? But for whatever reason, it's an incredible delivery she develops for that scene. Cantor. Absolutely the most stilted radio broadcast I've ever heard. So you can certainly understand why the bigwigs back east don't want to let her anywhere near a microphone ever again.
Oh, but she manages to convince them despite the nuisance of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who apparently, this is so embarrassing and heartbreaking, but who apparently, in fact, when he was on a bender in later life, would just call strangers and ask them, I'm F. Scott Fitzgerald. I'm the writer of The Great Gatsby. Don't you remember The Great Gatsby? It's just horrifying.
Yeah.
It's just a nightmare to think of that.
Yeah, and again, the movie, I think, does a very good job of putting you in his mind enough that you can almost understand. It makes you want to reach for a drink yourself.
Well, he's a person, and I don't know, this is the thing. This is how the movie presents him.
He's got these crushing responsibilities of keeping his wife, Zelda, in the proper care.
Yeah, and even though their marriage, by all accounts, was nightmarish, and he never felt like he really loved her, because I read the entire Wikipedia entry on F. Scott Fitzgerald before this podcast, he apparently was very guilty afterwards, once she was in the sanitarium.
Honor also demands that he keep his daughter in a good school, and the only way to do that is to kowtow to Hollywood, and he's not even able to do that. That scene where he's like, look, just tell me how to write it and I'll write it that way. And the studio head is like, well, look, me telling F. Scott Fitzgerald how to write?
Right, and he's between a rock and a hard place here, where on the one hand, he's not capable of dumbing himself down enough to write Hollywood movies, but on the other hand, he's not sure that even if he didn't have these pressing financial responsibilities, that he has it in him anymore to write a great novel. Like, the critics have already written him out of history. So it's, he's not in a place of great confidence.
No, one of the quickest falls from grace of all time.
And I just wonder, it's so interesting what it would have been like watching this movie in 1959, because he'd only been established as a literary idol or reestablished for a very short period. now watching it, it's like, watching this mythical figure prove to be just a pathetic human being. But it seems so early to have kind of knocked him off the pedestal again in 1959 or 1957 when this novel was published.
No, maybe, but I get the reverse impression that he is already so firmly reestablished that this movie knows, and Sheilah Graham's not trying to assassinate his character.
Of course not, but I mean...
They're going for extreme pathos, and it succeeds.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. I guess, any number of movies about Kurt Cobain's heroin addiction aren't going to knock him off any pedestals. And in fact, this is what I thought about. Like, this feels like an early version of one of those rock and roll death stories. Often, part of the rock and roll story is this, and then they got clean, and then they died.
I mean, he did so much damage to his body that he has a heart attack at 44. I think it's a really good script by Cy Bartlett.
You really feel that what he's going through is a tragedy. That this humiliation of him in Hollywood, this devaluation of him culturally, that these are all terrible things to do, not to a quote-unquote great man, but just to any human being of talent. That's all you have to feel about this poor guy, that this is just a human being of talent who's being tortured to death for it.
And the childlike delight he takes in any indication that people have heard of him.
Well, unless he's drunk, and then, that poor girl, who I guess isn't who he wants as a reader, somebody who's got a crush on him.
Right, okay. But that aside, when they show up at that playhouse and find out that it's just a student production and they're dressed for Grauman's Chinese premiere.
Oh, but that's also terrible.
It is. The excitement that he shows as they get ready to go there. It's a very effective performance by Peck. It's a great portrait of an artist exiled to the wilderness of culture. And we suffer with him, especially knowing that if he had just lived a few more years, he would have seen all of his...
Or not, or it never would have happened, as I was suggesting.
I guess. I mean, you'd have to ask Edmund Wilson, did he really only start writing about Fitzgerald because he was dead?
It's not about whether he was writing about Fitzgerald, it's about whether there was a mood to receive that message.
Right.
And, you can't discount the mode of romanticism in the canonization of American literary figures, or just American cultural figures in general.
And another tragedy that the film documents is that the Love of the Last Tycoon was never completed.
Well, Wilson completed it.
Well, that's not the same thing, is it?
Well, we're going to read it, apparently.
That's right. It's a really good book, from what I recall.
And of course, he was right that Hollywood does afford a great subject matter that very few people of American letters have tackled.
I also quite enjoy his series of short stories, the Pat Hobby stories, which are about a hack screenwriter.
But you do get this strange picture of Fitzgerald where he alternates between being a saint who just spouts pearls of wisdom all of the time about life and literature in the process of educating Sheilah, and then this monster created entirely by alcohol.
Well, no, not entirely, right? Because there's that scene on the beach, I think, is the key bridge between the two. Because he's starting to get pretty nasty when he's cross-examining her about the story that she tells about her origin.
Well, yeah.
Then he realizes what he's been doing and becomes the saint again.
Yes, apparently he was the movie doesn't really get into this very much, but apparently he was very jealous and obsessive in a way that makes me think of Ingmar Bergman's self-portrayals.
That scene just really sneaks up on you, and it is, to me, the tour de force of the movie. He's asking her these lighthearted questions about her romantic past, and she starts, in the same spirit, joking about different affairs that she may or may not have had, but then it all gets tangled up with the fact that he knows, and at this point we are starting to know that she's made up her entire life, and he starts getting snide about it, and she has a meltdown.
Yeah, well, in real life, there was a lot more of that.
And it sneaks up on you in the oeuvre of Deborah Kerr as well, because we are so used to seeing her as this icon of composure. And it just really shakes you all the more when she goes to pieces like that, and she's crying, and it's just such a vulnerable...
Well, that image where it gets me and where it really gets her in the performance is this image of the little girl going to the orphanage and having her hair shaved off, which apparently Sheilah Graham, according to her daughter, never got over that humiliation.
Yeah, and her hair looks so amazing in that beach scene, too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's deliberate.
A lot of thought went into all of this. Henry King should be proud.
Well, how did you feel about the fact, or do you even agree with me about this? Do you feel, let me put it as a question, do you feel like the movie presents this as an abusive relationship?
Yes.
Well, then how do you feel about the fact that she returns to him? Is she being caught in the cycle of abuse or the cycle of codependence? Because I think that now that is absolutely how it would be portrayed in a movie. But this movie isn't, we're not at the cultural point where that rhetoric is inevitable. And so I think that the movie gives you the space to look at what she's doing in different ways.
To me, it's a fascinating look at a romance that is abusive from the perspective of the person who's being abused. It doesn't flinch from showing you some of the worst stuff I've ever seen.
Well, he does almost kill her, or at least threaten to kill her at one point.
They don't show him mercilessly beating her, but you can easily believe that that's happening too, because of the way... I mean, Peck is a really dangerous figure on screen when he wants to be. He's scary.
This moment after that, when they're grappling with the gun, and then he switches over to indicating that he's going to commit suicide instead, and she just tells him to go ahead. I didn't drag myself out of the gutter, or I didn't pull myself up out of the gutter in order to waste my life on...
worthless drunk like you, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Apparently this was a line that when discussing her relationship with Fitzgerald, with her daughter, she would dwell on this line, because I think she felt like that was a really proud moment for herself.
Yeah. I mean, she's standing up for herself. She does love this man, and the movie makes it clear why she would love him, and it's kind of agnostic about whether she should have given him any further chances.
Right, she's like swinging back and forth between putting a restraining order on him and giving him another chance. These relationships happen. Is there anything objective to them? Or is it all in the eye of the beholder? How pathetic or codependent these relationships are, or whether there's any room for rational choice in a relationship with somebody you love who has mistreated you, terribly mistreated you, and physically abused you. And again, I think of the celebrity examples. John and Yoko got back together. He'd been addicted. He'd been terrible to her. He'd cheated on her. God knows what else happened. There's lots of celebrity examples of this sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in the movie telling me whether this is good or bad, and I don't think that it does. I think it just shows what happened.
I don't know. I think there's more to it than that, than just showing what happened, because I think we're supposed to be thinking about the choices that she's making. She's certainly thinking hard about them.
Whether she made the right choice or the wrong choice is kind of beside the point. What it's giving you is her perspective on everything that's happening. It never goes outside of her to show us someone else summing everything up and telling her, oh, this is no good for you, or you're doing the right thing.
Interesting comparison point. When I was thinking to myself, wouldn't it be cool for someone to make a movie about this material now and do a much less classical approach to the material than Henry King is using? I was thinking of Leaving Las Vegas, which we discussed in Theater and Moviegoing in Toronto.
Yeah, sure, I'd be open to watching another version of this story, but I like what Henry King did just fine.
Yeah, but I'm talking about, do we ask ourselves, that movie is so viscerally engrossing, do we ask ourselves, are these good decisions this woman is making, that Elizabeth Shue is making, to be in a relationship with Nicolas Cage?
No, it's an interesting point of comparison. But no, I think the integrity of Beloved Infidel is that it holds true to Sheilah Graham's viewpoint throughout. Shows us what she did and how she dealt with this man.
It shows an abusive relationship. Maybe this is what I'm getting at. It shows an abusive relationship, and depending how much in love you are, how enthralled you are with pop psychology, you could say that it must necessarily be a codependent relationship. It doesn't portray her as a victim.
No, well, that's what I mean.
It portrays her as completely an agent who is, in her mind, setting boundaries with a person she loves, right? So for her, this isn't like a cycle of codependency. It's I have set a boundary. I am still in love with you, and now I am willing to try this again.
And from the movie's perspective, they get a good last year out of it, and almost a final book.
I just find it interesting to see these decisions portrayed as something rational rather than something compulsive.
I feel like we're agreeing that this is a very unusual portrait it, of this kind of relationship.
And maybe those kinds of decisions aren't ever rational. Maybe they are always compulsive, but it's just a movie that gives you the space to look at it differently, to imagine a different scenario.
Sheilah Graham, as portrayed by Deborah Kerr, always seemed self-possessed.
Apparently she was self-possessed enough to deliver a killer zinger right in the middle of a life and death fight over a gun.
Right.
So she must have been a pretty self-possessed woman.
It's a real shame that I guess the public didn't go for it.
Too real.
Sadly, this is going to bring our short time with Deborah Kerr to a close. Of course, we'll see her again many times in other films and other contexts over the course of the coming years.
Well, this was your spotlight, so do you have any summary for this brief window onto her career?
Well, I knew the films at either end of the series, and what I didn't know was what would be in the middle. Dream Wife and Please Believe Me. Those movies were, well, in some ways worse and in some ways better than I thought they would be. Characters she was given to play in the middle films were a little stranger than I thought they would be, which I liked. Although, especially with Dream Wife, you've got a whole lot of baggage along with that and a whole lot of poor decisions. I'm more interested in finding out what this exposure to Deborah Kerr has meant to you, because you came in with not exactly the most exalted feelings about her. Whereas for me, she's always been one of my favorite actresses, so that's unchanged.
Well, I think what I said was that I thought of her as a quality actress who, obviously gave good performances, but whose persona and movies were maybe a little bit boring.
Do you leave her with that same impression or something different?
Well, yeah, obviously I did not think that any of these movies that we have covered for the podcast are boring, although I did prefer the first and last episodes.
Right. Fair enough.
But certainly there was a wide range of material, and I probably myself tend to forget that even the kind of quality dramas that Deborah Kerr was ultimately appearing in, that they're often really not as boring as you might think from their reputations of Tea and Sympathy, or of a drama about a literary icon like Beloved Infidel.
I think she was making some good choices, and her career certainly doesn't end here. She has a pretty good decade in the 1960s. We've seen one of the highlights of that decade for her, The Innocents, on this podcast. And as I said, we'll see many other Kerr movies in the future, so I'm sure we'll be hearkening back to this little series when we encounter them. Next time on the podcast, we'll be spending some more time with Deborah Kerr's old associates, Powell and Pressburger, because it's The Archers in Black and White. We'll be watching A Canterbury Tale, I Know Where I'm Going, and The Small Back Room. Very much looking forward to that.